The Eucharistic Miracle of Buenos Aires, Argentina, from 1992 to 1994 and lastly to 1996. The Parish of Santa Maria of Buenos Aires was the site of 3 Eucharistic miracles that occurred in 1992, 1994, and 1996. Dr. Ricardo Castñon Gomez was called by the then Archbishop of Buenos Aires, none other than our current Pope Francis, to analyze the miracle that occurred on August 15, 1996. In 1992, after Mass on Friday, May 1st, while putting the Blessed Sacrament away, a Eucharistic minister found some pieces of consecrated hosts on the corporal. Following what the Church prescribes in these situations, the priest had the pieces put in a vessel of water, which was then placed in the tabernacle, to wait for them to dissolve. During the following days, several priests went to check and saw that nothing had changed. 7 days later, on Friday, May 8th, they opened the tabernacle and saw that the host fragments had turned a reddish color that looked like blood. The following Sunday, May 10th, during the 2 evening masses, small drops of blood were noticed on the patens the priests used to distribute communion. On Sunday, July 24th, 1994, during the children's mass, when the Eucharistic minister took the pyx from the tabernacle, he saw a drop of blood running along its side. Again, on August 15th, 1996, during the Mass of the Assumption, a consecrated host which fell to the ground during the distribution of communion had to be placed in a vessel of water so it would dissolve. A few days later, on August 26th, a Eucharistic minister opened the tabernacle and saw that the host had changed into blood. This is the account given by Dr. Castñon Gomez regarding the Eucharistic miracle that occurred in 1996 and is still kept at Santa Maria Parish. On August 15, 1996, one of the faithful received the consecrated host in his hand to take communion, but inadvertently he let it fall to the ground and thought not to pick it up because it seemed dirty to him. Another more pious person noticed what had happened, picked it up, and immediately put it aside, informing the priest, Father Alejandro Pezet. The priest, following the directives of the church in these circumstances, put the host into a vessel of water which he placed in the tabernacle to wait for it to dissolve. On August 26, the tabernacle was reopened to get the vessel with the fallen host, and it was observed that it was not dissolved and showed several reddish stains that became larger each day. The priests of the parish immediately went to the Archbishop of Buenos Aires to recount what had happened. It was decided to wait before proceeding with investigations. In 1999, after the Archbishop was made aware of the fact that I was performing these scientific investigations for free, he entrusted me with the case. On October 6, 1999, I went to Buenos Aires and interviewed the 5 priests witnesses of the event who told me that there had been another consecrated host, which had bled in May of 1992. They had put it into distilled water, which is the worst way to preserve something, and I was very concerned. Everyone knows that when one draws blood, it is possible to obtain leukocyte formula, white blood cells. In blood, there is a variety of white blood cells with specific characteristics. The priest, in this case, of the first miracle, had asked one of the parishioners who was a chemist to analyze the bleeding host. She discovered that it was human blood and that it contained the entire leukocyte formula. She was very surprised to observe that the white blood cells were active. The lady doctor could not, however, perform the genetic examination, since at the time it was not easy to do. I brought samples from the 2 hosts which had bled to the archiepiscopal notary, who certified the legality of that action as requested by the church authorities in Argentina. I would like to point out that, before inviting me, the then Archbishop of Buenos Aires had already contacted the Holy See to ask for references about me. These were given by Most Reverend Gianfranco Girotti, who was then the Undersecretary at the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith and a direct collaborator of Cardinal Ratzinger. On October 21st, I went to the Forensic Analytical Genetics Laboratory in San Francisco, Argentina, which was supposed to perform the analysis of the samples that I had brought. On January 28, 2000, they found some fragments of human DNA in the samples, human blood that contained the human genetic code. On March of 2000, I was informed that the famous legal histopathologist Dr. Robert Lawrence, one of the top experts in tissue, would also participate in this analysis. I feared Dr. Robert Lawrence's participation because this would have required some substantial cost, which I would have to bear myself, but I was told that they wanted his collaboration because in the samples they had found some substances which resembled human tissue. Dr. Lawrence studied the samples and found in them human skin and white blood cells. In December of 2000, Dr. Lawrence told me that he could have obtained other samples of DNA. In 2001, I took my samples to Dr. Linoli, who identified the white blood cells and told me that most probably the samples were of heart tissue. The results obtained from the samples were similar to those of the studies performed on the host of the miracle of Lanciano. In 2002, we sent the sample to Dr. John Walker at the University of Sydney in Australia, who confirmed that the samples contained muscle cells and intact white blood cells, and everyone knows that white blood cells outside the body disintegrate in 15 minutes, and in this case, 6 years had already passed. In September of 2003, I went back to see Dr. Robert Lawrence, who confirmed that, in the light of the new investigations, one could conclude that the sample could correspond to the tissue of an inflamed heart. The studies therefore had demonstrated that these tissues were of an inflamed heart. This meant that the person to whom they belonged must have suffered greatly. To clarify our doubts, on March 2, 2004, we went to see the greatest expert in cardiac pathologies and forensic medicine of the heart, Dr. Frederick Zugubi of New York at Columbia University. The professor, however, did not know that the sample I had brought him came from a consecrated host. Dr. Zugubi said to me, "The sample you brought me is heart muscle of the myocardium. To be precise, it is the left ventricle." And he confirmed that my patient had suffered greatly. Then I asked him, "Doctor, why has my patient suffered greatly?" He answered me, "Because your patient has some thrombi. At certain moments he could not breathe, oxygen did not reach him, he labored and suffered much because every breath was painful. Probably they gave him a blow at the level of the chest. Moreover, the heart showed dynamic life activity at the moment you brought me the sample." "Why?" I asked him. "Because we found some intact white blood cells, and white blood cells are transported only by the blood. So if white blood cells are present, it is because at the moment you brought me the sample, it was pulsating." The doctor then asked to whom this sample belonged, and when we told him that it came from a consecrated host, he exclaimed, "I do not believe it." He was greatly moved. The same professor had shown us in a book the case of one of his patients who showed the same lesions as those of the sample that we had brought him. The myocardium is the muscle that gives life to the whole heart and body. Rightly, a theologian pointed out to me how the fact that it was really the myocardium was not by chance but was symbolic. The Lord in this miracle wanted to show us his myocardium, which is the muscle that gives life to the whole heart, just as the Eucharist does with the church. And why the left ventricle? Because from it comes the purified blood, and Jesus is the one who purifies his church from her sins. Dr. Zugubi said to me again, "At the moment you brought me this sample, this heart was alive." His report was sent out on March 26, 2005, 5.5 years after the studies began, and the conclusions were, "These are heart tissues, undergoing degenerative changes of the myocardium, and these changes are due to the fact that the cells are inflamed, and it is the left ventricle of the heart." On March 17, 2006, I brought the results to Cardinal Jorge Maria Bergoglio. His report was sent out on March 26, 2005, 5.5 years after the studies began. The conclusions were, "These are heart tissues, undergoing degenerative changes of the myocardium, and these changes are due to the fact that these cells are inflamed, and it is the left ventricle of the heart